Hello and welcome back to KSP, and today we are leaving Ike. We got about a quart of fuel left in our radial fuel tanks, and that will be hopefully enough to get us into a nice stable orbit around the moon Ike. Anyway, we're raising up to about 14k height, and then we're going to circularize our orbit, and we're going to do this as efficiently as possible. So we are waiting until we are at the very tip of our periapsis, not periapsis, apoapsis. Anyway, yes, it's a case of we are thrusting up and heading towards circularization here, like so. So it's not exactly the most balanced of orbits, but it doesn't matter because we are aiming to get back into a duna orbit with this. Anyway, we have just sorry, my mind just failed me for a moment there. We are aiming to get a node here which shows us a route to an orbit that's fairly small around the planet Duna. This I'm doing for a numerous load of reasons, and it eventually all comes down to the fact that it makes it easier for us to redock with the main SS Odin here. Anyway, as you saw, I just released the one solar panel that survived so that we have enough battery power left, because I do not want to run out even though we have literally mountains of electrical energy. But we're going to be using a lot of it anyway, so I'd rather be safe than sorry and keep the maximum up for as long as possible. Anyway, we're ditching that stage now, and that's because we've run out of fuel. So we throttle up to the point where we get to our ideal orbit, or near perfect, well, the perfect orbit for what we were looking for. Anyway, skip ahead in time now. We have gotten to a point now where we have made a plane change, and we are now matching planes with the SS Odin. And sorry about that. Here we're doing a throttling up maneuver to raise our apoapsis up to nearly the same point that the SS Odin has, in the same position. Unfortunately, this will also bring us a near encounter with the SS Odin. Anyway, as you can see, we are ever so slowly rising up, and because Juna's gravity is so weak, sorry again, my mic actually accidentally got hit here. Um, sorry. Anyway, what was I saying? Um, because Juna's gravity is so weak here, it doesn't take that much fuel to get to a point in an orbit where we could almost escape, which is what we have with the SS Odin. Anyway, we are orbiting around to our point where we nearly encounter the SS Odin, and it's just a case of getting as close as possible, and then we're going to have to start doing some maneuvers here to match our orbit so it becomes incredibly easy to dock. Anyway, we're moving at 12 meters per second relative to the target, which isn't that much, but compare it to the speed that we're going around this part of the orbit, which is about 30 meters per second. That's 1/3 of the speed of our orbit. So, you know, in retrospect, that is actually a hell of a lot. Anyway, we're just slowing ourselves down relative to the target, and we get another point here where we are close to the encounter. But I think I'm going to skip ahead here because, you know, it's just a bunch of time of me tweaking and getting ourselves as close as possible, and you've already seen that happen in a previous episode. Anyway, we've done all that, and we're now getting to a point where we are able to dock. So I'm just using the RCS fuel, or the monopropellant fuel rather, as a way to maneuver our lander back onto its docking port without using the little bit of fuel that we have left in that lander. Anyway, it's just a case of moving ever so slowly and whatnot. We're moving at 20 centimeters per second here, so you know it's pretty slow in the grand scheme of things. That's about walking pace. Well, slower than walking pace, definitely. Anyway, just doing ever so slight touches on the movement, and you know, moving slowly but surely into that docking port. And you know, got to make sure that we are all aligned correctly, whatnot. I'm using the shadow as a reference point here, but it's not the greatest one to use because you know it's all at an angle relative to the sun. So as you can see, I have gotten a fair bit high, but slowly but surely moving myself forwards, and got to go down a little bit, and we're almost at a point now where we will get magnetized if we bring ourselves up a little bit, and voila, we have magnetized. We are a little bit off angle and not streamlined, but I will fix that up in just a second, like so. So we just ditch that stage. We're going to move all the fuel into the main fuel tank now, because we're not going to Duna, I decided. We need to make sure that all the signs that we have attained from that one Ike landing gets back to Kerbin, because you know that's a hell of a lot of science on that, and you know I would rather get that back to Kerbin and not risk a Duna landing where we don't get as much science. So you know. Anyway, I brought myself in a bit closer here to Duna so that we can get some near Duna science with our other lander that you know we didn't use. So we are still getting some science for this, but not as much as we could do. So I just use all of the bits and pieces, collect as much science as possible, keep all the data because I want to bring this rocket back to Kerbin. Anyway, I do an ever so slight burn here, a little bit more, and we have got our escape route. Because as you saw, it took barely anything for us to escape here, so you know that was actually really handy. So yeah, we are now back into our solar orbit. For a moment I thought we were going to have another Duna orbit and we'd have to do something, but you know that was just a mismatch of how gravity works and whatnot. Anyway, here we have created a node which brings us directly onto the orbit path of Kerbin and brings us a nice and close encounter with Kerbin as well, which is always lovely jubbly. So get to here and start burning retrograde around the sun, and that will slowly but surely bring us back to the planet Kerbin. Anyway, here we got our encounter. It was about a 10-minute burn and really slow and boring, and nothing exciting happened. Anyway, we got our encounter with Kerbin, so it's now just a case of we are faffing around with the orbits a little bit to bring us in at an angle where gravity will have a huge effect on us and slow us down. Well, not so much slow us down, but make closing our orbit easier. Because if you think about it, when we're closing our periapsis up here, we are effectively slowing down from an orbit around the sun to the point where an orbit around Kerbin is greater than an orbit around the sun. So we'll fall around Kerbin instead, if you get what I mean. So I bring it in a bit closer, but then I realize we're probably not going to have enough fuel to do that all the way. So I bring it into about that point there and circularize it, which takes up a little less fuel, but you know, we're at a better point in order to do it, I think. I don't know whether that's actually mathematically correct or not, but you know, that's what I ended up doing for this mission. I probably could have checked to see how much delta V it would have taken to change that point in time. But anyway, rotating around to that node point so that we know the direction in which to thrust when we get to our periapsis. And then it will just be a case of speeding up time until we get to that point. And of course we want to do it right on the periapsis here, so that we maximize our fuel usage. Anyway, it's not a huge burn, which is why we can leave it quite late. Anyway, skipped all that because again nothing great happened, and we are now in our full orbit. And now we are bringing ourselves around to the apoapsis here so that we can bring in our periapsis closer to the planet Kerbin, because we want that low down as possible so that when we jettison all of our bits and pieces to land, because we're jettisoning 4 things to land: the 2 landers, the science lab, and the fuel tank, because the fuel tank is now done and empty. So we may as well get rid of that, because otherwise it's just going to be cluttering up space. Anyway, using the last drips of fuel that we have left to bring in our periapsis. You may or may not have saw that we did have a brief encounter with Minmus, but I decided to not use that. And it's same for this encounter with the Mun, because, you know, if we balls it up, we have not enough fuel to correct it. Like, we've only got 6 liters of fuel left, which is not going to be enough in order to correct the fuel. So I'm just checking the monopropellant here, and then I'm going to start undocking things. So yes, these were all done in separate times, but I decided to overlay them because otherwise you'll be watching the same, essentially the same 4 things over and over again. So in the top left and bottom right, we got the 2 landers, which are basically just going to be going straight down to Kerbin after they've rotated a couple of times. In the top right, that is me ditching the fuel tank, which you can see in the bottom left, and the top right is actually just going to be following the main flight capsule and the science unit. Anyway, the 2 landers basically use all their monopropellant that they have left to slow their orbit down to a point where they can just straight up land. In the bottom right one, I was considering doing an aero braking maneuver, but it just got a bit boring, so I decided to go straight down in the end, like I'm doing with the upper left one. Anyway, the bottom left one, which is the fuel tank, I am actually just doing an aero braking maneuver like I was planning to do with the other capsule, but I couldn't really do much more with this one because I needed to use the whole rocket to put it into that orbit where it would naturally degrade, and then bring the main rocket out of that, you know, because the main rocket section I didn't want to have degrade, because it's still got 1 pilot up in there and he's going to be staying up in orbit. And the fuel tank has no control on it whatsoever, and it's got no fuel left in it either, or any thrusters. The 2 landers are now entering in the atmosphere, and as you can see with the upper right hand screen, I'm just releasing all of the solar panels for the main flight command section of the rocket, and I've just ditched the science pod, which will degrade into an orbit which will aero brake. The fuel tank is now going to do some extreme litho braking, and the 2 landers are opening up their parachutes to have lots of nice fun in the oceans. And now we've just cut back to the science pod, which is going to do some aero braking. We're about 40k up in the atmosphere, 45 give or take, and we are getting slowed down, hence why we spun around there, because that direction that we're in is the most aerodynamic direction at that speed, apparently, or I assume anyway. So that's why we flipped around, and we're slowing down because of the thickness of the atmosphere. But it looks like we're escaping again to a higher up orbit. We're still slowing down, but it doesn't look like we're going to have enough slowdown speed to get into the planet, which is okay. because otherwise we would have been landing on the night side of the planet, which is something I don't particularly want to do with this. That's because that that entire pod is actually quite fragile. So I want to make sure that we can land in a suitable position. So it's just a case of we're speeding up now until we um, get to a point where we can start slowing down again, or it will naturally start slowing down again. Because again, we have no fuel left in this. We've literally used it all up, which was a bit of an oops on my part, but I wanted to make sure that that command section retained in orbit so that we can use it for a load of other missions. Anyway, we are heading towards our periapsis. No, not periapsis, apoapsis here. And we are heading towards the light side of the planet as we are starting to head down into the atmosphere. And I'm pretty sure this time we are now going to start slowing down to a point where we can actually land. And you may notice in a second we're heading over one of the previous landing sites for one of our previous missions. If you can tell me what one that is, I'll be impressed, because I can't even remember. Anyway, we had a bit of a video feed cut out there for a moment, but it was only for like a split second. Anyway, it looks like we're going to be heading straight into the ocean here, which is not ideal, to be honest, because the ocean, I think, would probably do a bit more damage. I'm just reviewing all the data and doing some experiments on another piece of data which I completely forgot to do, but you know, we got some nice re-entry effects as we head in through the atmosphere, and as you can see, we are actually heading en route to the Space Center. But I decided to deploy my parachutes here because we don't actually have any way of landing this thing, and I don't know whether it will want to land successfully. We're still going at quite a speed. Unfortunately, I think I made a grave miscalculation here, in which I opened the chutes a bit too early, and I suddenly realized that we have a major issue in which we are heading pod first. So I decided to cut some of the parachutes here, which cause us to start spinning around like a crazy lunatic, unfortunately. But there's a reason why I decided to do this, and that reason is that it will make the bottom end heavier, which will cause the pod to land on the RCS tanks as opposed to the science pod. And I don't want that science pod to break because, you know, it's got a load of important data from Duna orbit there. Anyway, we managed to rectify the spinning problem and cut that final parachute. We are slowing down at 6.6 meters per second, which is a bit fast for my liking, but we shouldn't destroy too much. And voila, we have landed. One piece did blow off and a couple of pieces did fall off, but we landed successfully, hooray, and on land. So I send out one of Gilbert's Kerbal, I think it is, and get him to take a surface sample and plant us a flag to commemorate this wonderful landing. So yes, we're doing a bit of surface science here because surface science never hurt no one. And now we're just having a look at the wreckage, and I did attempt to get back in the pod, but I think that was a fruitless endeavor because this guy is tiny and can't jump very high. So, oh, pardon me. So yeah, taking a look at all the data and science, and now we're heading back to the Space Center. Now we're going to start recovering all the bits and pieces here for you guys, and you know, need to recover all of the science because, you know, science makes the world go round, really. So we've got a bit of data from him, And now we're just collecting all of the bits and pieces of the space pod that you know, crash landed and spread all over the place. So recovering all of the pieces from the science pod landing point, and what we're picking up here is actually some of the decoupling nodes from the last launch that we did that put up the lander pod. Probably the one that we didn't use, but you know. Anyway, go back to the Space Center, pick up the last few bits and pieces because we don't need to pick up the command, well, the structural pieces. Anyway, as you can see, there we go. We're now picking up the landers. So that one's got 88 science on it from the Duna orbit, and this one's got 1,062 science on it. Anyway, that's the end of this episode. Hope you enjoyed it. We managed to successfully return from Duna. Anyway, I will see you next time.